War, diplomacy, power. These words describe the actions of nations, but behind them are lives, decisions, and consequences. The United States, often seen as a global leader, has long been involved in conflicts far from its borders. Syria is just one chapter in a larger story, one filled with questions about morality, strategy, and collateral damage. Today, we're not here to tell you what to think. Instead, we'll lay out the facts, connect the dots, and leave you to decide, what role does the United States play in Syria, and what does it mean for the world? The Syrian Civil War erupted in 2011 during the Arab Spring, a wave of protests across the Middle East, which saw people demanding more freedom and governmental reforms. What began as calls for reform quickly turned into a brutal and bloody conflict, with the Syrian government harshly cracking down on protesters, leading to widespread violence. As chaos spread throughout the country, so did the involvement of outside powers, each with their own interests and agendas. The United States officially entered the scene with airstrikes against ISIS in 2014, presenting itself as a protector of global stability and a determined fighter against terrorism. But the United States didn't just target ISIS, it also had broader objectives in the region. It also supported various groups opposing the Syrian government, hoping to influence the outcome of the conflict. Some of these groups later dissolved or turned against each other, leaving behind a trail of abandoned weapons and further instability. These interventions were often framed as necessary for peace and security, but the reality on the ground was far more complex. But what's left unsaid is the staggering human cost. Civilians killed, cities destroyed, and a region thrown into further disarray and suffering. Was this collateral damage, or a price deemed acceptable for larger geopolitical goals? The ethical questions remain. To understand the United States' role in Syria, it helps to look at history and see the recurring patterns of intervention. In 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, killing over 200,000 people and leaving a lasting impact on global politics. At the time, it was justified as a way to end World War II quickly and save countless lives that would have been lost in a prolonged conflict. But decades later, questions remain. Was this truly the only option, or was it a demonstration of power to the world, a message to emerging superpowers? The Vietnam War saw the United States fighting communism in Southeast Asia, leading to the deaths of millions, including civilians, and leaving a scar on American history. Chemical weapons like Agent Orange didn't just devastate the environment, they caused lasting health problems for generations, affecting both soldiers and civilians. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, claiming that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, a claim that was widely publicized and debated. Those weapons were never found, leading to widespread criticism and questions about the true motives behind the invasion. The war destabilized Iraq, leading to the rise of groups like ISIS, groups that the United States later fought in Syria, creating a cycle of conflict. And then there's Pakistan, where drone strikes targeted militants but often killed civilians, sparking outrage and further complicating international relations. A wedding here, a school there, mistakes or something else? These incidents raise important questions about the ethics and effectiveness of such interventions. Syria has been torn apart by war for over a decade, leaving a trail of destruction and despair. Millions of people have fled the country, creating one of the largest refugee crises in modern history, with families scattered across the globe. Those who remain face poverty, violence, and fear on a daily basis, struggling to survive amidst the chaos. The United States played a significant role in shaping this reality, influencing the course of the conflict. Airstrikes targeted ISIS strongholds but also hit civilian areas, causing widespread devastation. In 2017, one United States airstrike killed over 200 civilians in Mosul, a grim reminder of how often ordinary people pay the price in conflicts caught in the crossfire. Beyond airstrikes, the United States provided weapons and training to opposition groups, aiming to support their cause. But what happens when those groups collapse or shift alliances, leaving behind a power vacuum? Weapons intended for liberation can end up in the hands of extremists, creating new threats and further complicating the situation. Every action in Syria carries consequences. Support for opposition groups weakens the Syrian government but risks empowering extremists. Airstrikes eliminate militants but often kill civilians. What drives these decisions? Is it a commitment to democracy and human rights or a strategic interest in controlling the Middle East? Critics argue that the US prioritizes its own interests, using humanitarian rhetoric to justify military campaigns. Others believe that without US intervention, the situation would be even worse. But how can we measure worse when lives are lost either way? As a superpower, the US often steps into conflicts with the promise of resolution. But its track record shows that interventions leave behind as many questions as they answer. In Syria, the conflict continues with no clear end in sight. The US has reduced its direct involvement, but the scars remain, for Syrians and for the global perception of American power. So, where does this leave us? Is the US a force for good, bringing stability to chaotic regions, or is it a destabilizing power pursuing its own goals at the expense of others? Maybe it's both, or maybe it's something else entirely. History is complicated, and so are the actions of nations. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Is intervention ever justified? And what does it mean for those caught in the crossfire?